Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream.
And I'm Malika Bilal. We continue our week of shows on the anniversary of India's partition. Today, perhaps the most visible hangover of partition, Kashmir.
India and Pakistan each administer part of it, all while calls for self-determination echo through the region.
Hi everybody, this is Muhammad Ali. I am a journalist working with the Hindu newspaper. I'm with the stream.
Not much has changed in the 70 years since partition for those living in the Kashmir region. The violence and upheaval of that event is no mere memory. It's a part of daily life.
The story of Kashmir is complicated. Shortly after partition, India and Pakistan fought their first war over the region. It ended with the United Nations brokered peace deal, splitting Kashmir temporarily into two parts, one administered by India and one by Pakistan. But it's been that way ever since.
This week, as part of their country's Independence Day celebrations, the Prime Ministers of India and Pakistan renewed calls for peace in the disputed territory.
Neither abuses nor bullets will solve it. Kashmir's problems can be solved by embracing the people of Jammu and Kashmir.
It is incumbent upon the international community to play its role in the resolution of the regional conflicts, particularly the Kashmir dispute in conformity with the UN resolutions on the subject, with a view to ensuring durable peace in the region.
So what does the future hold? Will Kashmir always be divided? Here to discuss that in Pennsylvania, Hafsa Kanjwal. She's a college professor and researcher on the social and cultural history of Kashmir. In the UK, Shams Rahman, he's a journalist and author of the book Azad Kashmir and British Kashmiri Diaspora.
In the India-administered city of Srinagar, Rifat Mohideen, she's a journalist covering women's issues and conflict in the region. And in the Pakistan-administered city of Dadiyal, Tanveer Ahmed, an independent researcher. Hello, guest. It's really good to have you here. I was just thinking about a description I heard of Kashmir 70 years on from partition. And the description was a festering wound. Tanveer, how would you describe Kashmir?
Yes, I think no doubt whatever happened in 1947 was a great human tragedy, and it wasn't static. It's a dynamic process. It's something which people are still trying to come to terms with, because after all those killings, many people are still separated from each other, brothers from sisters, fathers from children, etc., etc. So the tragedy lives on, in simple terms.
Rifat, Kashmir 2017 for you is what?
Kashmir for me is a beautiful present in 2070, and there is so much blood being spilled every day on the roads. People are like frustrated, people are alienated, like they don't see any hope in the near future.
Here's one reflection from someone online. This is Mahima, who writes in, past and present is flooded with bloodshed. As an Indian, I want Kashmir Valley to be a peaceful valley in the future. So that's one person's perspective. But I want to move to this next tweet from Adil Hussein. Looking at, you heard the Prime Minister's remarks a little bit earlier in this show. Adil says India and Pakistan may have turned 70 today, but they haven't quite grown up to resolve the Kashmir dispute. Hafsa, of course, we saw the celebrations in Pakistan and in India earlier this week. What were those celebrations like for Kashmiris?
I mean, for Kashmiris, 70 years after partition, when the two countries got decolonized, it was a moment of colonization, essentially, for most Kashmiris. So it's been prolonged disappointments of unfinished, of promises that were broken by the Indian leadership, by the Pakistani leadership, as well as their own Kashmiri political elites. So it is a festering wound. It's the unfinished business of partition, and it remains to be the one issue that's really holding South Asia back.
I'm just going to show Shams, our audience, the part of the world that we're talking about. So there's a map that AlJazeera.com put together. It's how India, Pakistan and Bangladesh were formed. There's a lot of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh history, but this is the particular part where we're going to look at where we're talking about. We have India-administered Kashmir, we have Pakistan-administered Kashmir. If you were to say what was the biggest mistake that happened 70 years ago, what would it be, Shams?
I think the biggest mistake was to view Kashmir from the two-nation perspective and see it as a Hindu-Muslim problem. Whereas in actual fact, it was the problem of democracy. People within the state had a very popular democratic struggle to reform the monarchy into a responsible government, into a democratic government, and there were 3 elections already held in the state, and the reforms were being introduced, and so it was going to be a constitutional monarchy. It was kind of agreement between all the main political forces. But within Kashmir, there was some vision issue within the Kashmiri politicians, and that was then exploited by the politicians of India and Pakistan, and they turned this democratic struggle into a territorial dispute. And that was, I think, the fundamental mistake, from where then a lot of other problems were, sprung out, and we are still dealing with them till this day, through so many tragedies on the way.
Yeah, if I can just come in, I mean, just what I wrote before today, 5 things. I just can mention them very shortly. There are basically 3 narratives in contest with each other: the Indian narrative, the Pakistani narrative, and the Kashmiri narrative, which again needs further explanation, which we may be able to do further on into the program. The issue is, I think, more about water than anything else, which is underreported, and is draped in either a secular India wanting to ensure that a Muslim majority, the single Muslim majority state in the whole of India, remains with India, and of course the two-nation theory, which Pakistan espouses, and which hitherto, before I think before the 1930s, it was a term totally unheard of in the history of Islamic history or Muslim history, if you like. Apart from that, I think whatever's happened so far whatever the Kashmiris or people of Jammu and Kashmir have done has always been in reaction to what India or Pakistan may have done. And I think what's very important is for us to choreograph the future, if I may say so.
Could I jump in here for a second?
Yeah, sure.
So one of the important things that you said was in relation to Jammu and Kashmir's political status between India and Pakistan, and how India has its own reasonings for holding on to Kashmir, and Pakistan does as well. What I think gets overlooked here is the Kashmiri narrative that doesn't necessarily fit so easily. A vast majority of Kashmiris actually would prefer independence, so they don't necessarily believe in this sort of secular India, especially when we see what's going on in India today. And nor do they necessarily believe that because of their Muslim identity, they should be a part of Pakistan.
So taking that point, Hafsa, I heard that point, and Tanveer, I heard your point. So taking that point, I want to take it down a little bit further and drill down to then what that means for people actually now living on the ground. I want you to have a listen to 2 people. One is Syed Nizam Shah. He's currently living in Karachi in Pakistan, and he's speaking to his granddaughter, Hani Mazari, about his family in Indian-administered Kashmir. He was in the UK when partition happened and when the dispute over Kashmir began, and he was stuck. Here's what he told the stream.
Because like all Kashmiris and others, we felt that this is a temporary situation. United Nations is involved, mediators coming from various other countries, ceasefire line and all the rest of it, and UN resolutions will be enforced and honored. So it would be nice being in Pakistan. Whenever the mood was or holidays, I could get in a car and drive within 1 day from Rawalpindi to my home in Srinagar. Unfortunately, this never came around, and all those hopes and dreams we had have now vanished.
So Rafat, he talks about families being separated. That was then, but even today we see tweets like this. Mohammed Faisal says, the line of control is the Berlin Wall that never got demolished. The occupation of Kashmir is become the highest militarized region in the world. And the line of control, of course, is that line that splits those 2 sides, Indian and Pakistan administered Kashmir. Rafat, what does that look like for people living there? What does that look like when their families are torn apart, really?
You know, it really is a heartbreaking situation. If partition has left something behind. It's in Kashmir, it's a living legacy. Kashmir dispute is a living legacy of the partition. If today India and Pakistan, they think that now they are independent, they celebrate this day. But for us, this day is the nightmare. You know, like young people, they were not when the partition took place, but the everyday brutality, the everyday killings, the everyday blinding of people, it reminds them that there is something that happened that day and that changed our fate forever. You know, this partition has left a wound. It opens every day in Kashmir. We live it every day. Yesterday, like when India and Pakistan celebrated its independence, there was curfew in Kashmir. Phones were locked. Internet was down. So how we are supposed to react in such a situation?
Rifat, there's something that I noticed. I was looking through your Twitter feed and you said on August the 15th, I feel special, my phone and internet working since morning, poking your tongue out there. A little bit of irony or satire or just keeping a stiff upper lip there. But the everyday concerns of people living in Indian-administered Kashmir, I'm wondering about the violence that happens and how often that happens. Let me show Shams, our audience, some of the pictures that we've been sharing on Al Jazeera again. This is a little boy. He's looking through a bullet-riddled window, and this is in India-administered Kashmir. Women protesting about the killing of their 60-year-old neighbour. Show you one more here. And this is Indian forces firing. The Indian forces remind our international audience why they're in Indian-administered Kashmir and what is the continual conflict that's going back and forth between what seems to be civilians or activists and the Indian army.
The Kashmir conflict, you know, now is in a different...
I'm going to bring in Shams, Rifat, because it's nice to hear from him. Please. He's been studying some of the resistance movements on both sides of the line of control. Shams, go ahead.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, Rifat and Hafsa maybe are more qualified in terms of what is exactly going on there today. But if we look there in a political context, then obviously the both armies came to conquer Kashmir. And when the ceasefire was brokered by the United Nations, they were supposed to be protecting Kashmiris and creating environment for for a peaceful plebiscite to happen. Obviously, then their presence gradually changed from protective army into occupation armies. And on both sides, primarily the both armies are occupying the land. However, in the Indian side of Kashmir in 1987, when people tried to use the democratic avenue to express their dissent and difference from the ruling elites, they were then, obviously the elections were heavily rigged, and in response to that, then the things actually took a different direction and it became violent. And then obviously that is when Indian army was unleashed and the real occupation phase was seen by the world, and it is still happening till this day. Today the army is army of occupation for almost everybody. They are viewed as army of occupation. So till this occupation is ended, the violence will be erupting again and again. And obviously today it is in the valley of Kashmir, but it will happen. The situation is not as peaceful on the other side of the line of occupation, I would say. It is the line of occupation. And on the other side, the situation is also gradually evolving and moving towards that kind of situation. So I think that, you know, the Kashmiris, all parts of the Kashmir have to speak with one voice that we don't want these armies in Kashmir. Unless these armies are removed, the violence will never stop. The situation will be exploited from this actor or that actor.
So, Shams, you have lots of people wanting to jump in. Tanveer wants to say something. Hafsa wants to say something. But I want to bring in one voice before I go to you, Hafsa, because he mentioned something. He says that, you know, there are an occupation army, an army of occupation. But for some people, they're not viewed as that. And I want to share this viral tweet from Rohit Chowdhury. He says, this needs to be shared widely. Take a look at this. Have a listen to what she's saying. So she's shouting pro-India slogans. She's pledging her allegiance to India. She is in Indian-administered Kashmir, and she is surrounded, of course, by Indian soldiers. So for her, they are a protective arm. Hafsa, why is this important?
I mean, I think it's important because by showing this video, they're actually proving the case of those who want independence or those who want to separate from India. She's the lone woman standing there being protected by the army, calling for pro-Indian slogans. If you show other images and photographs and videos of hundreds and thousands of Kashmiris who come out risking their lives, facing Indian bullets and pellets that will blind them, that will injure them, that will disable them, speaking against India, I mean, that is really the sentiment in Kashmir that we're dealing with. I'm not sure about the identity of this woman, but for sure she may strongly believe in India, but she is alone. She is a very rare and lone voice as a Kashmiri. The one thing I wanted to mention earlier when we were speaking about the occupation and the military is, of course, we can talk about things like torture and rape and extrajudicial killings. And there's numbers for that. You can get them online about what has been happening in Kashmir. But there's also things that happen in terms of everyday life that sort of get overlooked. Just one example is friends and family of mine that live there. They haven't gone to school during moments of uprising. They don't go to school for months at a time. Last year, after the death of Burhan Wani, my cousin didn't go to school for 5 to 6 months. And we talk about education, and there's this sort of Islamophobic rhetoric around education and Muslim societies inhibiting education. But here we have a military occupation that's inhibiting education and children's rights and youth rights, and nobody wants to talk about that. So the other thing that I wanted to mention.
I'm just going to bring in, Tanvir, I hear you, I'll come straight to you. I just want to bring in some voices of two Kashmiri politicians. One is very sympathetic to India. The other one is thinking we need a separate Kashmir, separate from India, separate from Pakistan. They talked to Al Jazeera about 2 weeks ago. Have a listen to what they said.
Whenever there is a cross-border terrorism, it is the Kashmiri who dies. And that is the most unfortunate thing. That is what we've been calling, because probably Islamabad and Delhi have been busy in their own ego battle. What we say is the only way out is to start a dialogue process.
We separatists are not violence mongers. India is ignoring Jammu and Kashmir, saying it is an internal issue. It is not an internal issue. We are advocating for a dialogue, a peaceful resolution of Jammu and Kashmir through a political process.
Two different politicians from different perspectives, but saying pretty much the same thing, that Kashmiri should decide what happens to Kashmir. Tanvir, what did you want to add? Go ahead.
Yeah, the three things that I mentioned earlier, one of them was about this battle of three competing narratives. Now, apart from those three narratives, the Indian, the Pakistani, and the Kashmiri, or the J&K, Jammu and Kashmir narrative, are also regional narratives, and these are multiple narratives, and some of them may be associated with a particular religion or a particular minority or with a particular region. And I think when we're talking about going forward, I mean, maybe this is not that part of the program yet.
Oh, it most definitely is. We only have a few minutes left, so let's go forward, not go back.
Oh, dear. Oh, okay,
I think I want to add something.
So, let Tanvir to finish.
I just want to say,
I
just want to say that the future needs to be choreographed by the people of this territory without any external influence and or interference. And what that would mean taking account of all the various narratives that exist in the territory, irrespective of whichever part of the territory they belong to. And I think that's one part of moving forward and choreographing the future.
Sure. I just want to add one thing.
Rifat? Yep.
Yeah, actually, you know, in ground situation in Kashmir, it's very difficult. You know, it's very difficult to live that situation. From last 1 year, more than like 110 civilians have died. So you can understand the trauma of 110 families. Even in this year, like 130 local fighters, like some of them who have just joined militancy for a week, are killed. And that what follows that is civilian protests, thousands of people participating in the funerals of these local militants. and then everything is being controlled with the help of the military. But I think in long run, military solution might not be the solution, because you have been doing that for so long and it's failing every day. People go and risk their lives to save the local rebels. So you have to understand, India and Pakistan, who are just bragging their national interest, who are behaving like any other nation state behaves. So they have to understand that the promised plebiscite, the promised referendum has not been held, and Kashmir is a problem. It's a political problem which needs a solution.
To add to what Griffith said, there's an increasing trend, because there has been a mass uprising against the state. The Indian state is very interested in depicting this as an Islamist jihad, or linking it with ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And there are a lot of strange things happening on the ground. I mean, when you go there recently, people are perplexed at who these new groups are, who the new militants are, who's backing them. So one thing I think to keep in mind is, because the Indian state is increasingly losing its moral ground in Kashmir, they are attempting to depict this as an Islamist jihad, whereas the struggle is very far from that, and religion continues to be depicted in a very negative light. But I recently read an article by a Kashmiri psychiatrist who sort of looks at religion in a very different way, in that it has actually provided solace to people who have suffered, whose kids have been disappeared, whose family members have been killed. The only thing that's keeping the place from a very sort of a national mental health epidemic is their religious faith, or belief in some kind of eternal justice.
And Hafsa, I hear you there, and we've talked a lot. I've heard one second, because I've heard a lot about what the Indian government should do. I want to bring in what the Pakistani government should do. Yeah. Sophia Ahmed says, I would like to see the Pakistani government make more of an effort in the region. The government needs to provide employment opportunities for the youth in the area. They can no longer rely on immigration to the UK. And she goes on to say, I do think hearts and minds can be changed if Pakistan was to offer some concessions and inject some funding into the region. Shams, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think Pakistani can play a more significant role than this, and in terms of funding, that is a different issue. Actually, Pakistan gets a lot from Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, and they give back a very little, but they still tell people that we give you and then you eat. You can't eat even without us. Yeah. So, but the real role of Pakistan is that they should give full autonomy to the regions under their control, and they have to have a proper democratic process there. Currently, nobody can participate in elections if they don't take oath that they will be loyal to the accession to Pakistan ideology. So only pro-Pakistanis can participate in elections. And this is, I think, the example that how Pakistan views Kashmir. So Pakistan can be very, very open, and Pakistan can be more supportive. They can play a more effective role if they can give more freedoms to areas under their control.
All right.
Sorry, Tanveer, go on.
Yeah, Tanveer, we're right at the end of the show. I know it's frustrating because there's so much to talk about. I'm just showing this headline here. Kashmir Observer, 70 years later, are we still waiting for Independence Day? If you've been listening to this conversation, you know the answer is absolutely yes. How has this been going down online, Malika?
I'll end with this tweet from Mudassar, who says, Kashmir is divided between two nations who claim it in its entirety, and amidst their fight for the land of Kashmir, the Kashmiris are crushed.
We continue our conversations about partition 70 years on. In the next 8-day stream, we'll be looking at Bangladesh.
And for more oral history, you can head over to aljazeera.com/partition memories. It's here on my laptop, where the stream has gathered family stories from the end of the British Raj to early days of independence. Now, of course, if you missed any of the conversations from earlier in the week, you'll be able to find them on our website, aljazeera.com/the stream.